Good afternoon, Senator Rennick. It's really good to hear from you. How are you going?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Morgan. How are you?
Yeah, okay, thanks. I was wondering if I could ask you a couple of questions, if that'd be all right.
Yep, sure. Far
Um,
away.
the major parties seem to have pretty much no concern for the plight of millions of us Australians, and I just wonder, even though it's getting worse and worse, if you have any idea why that might be.
Yeah, look, I think a lot of politicians are generally concerned, to be honest. The problem is they don't know what the solution is and they don't know how to solve the problem. That's what it is, to be quite honest. I think a lot of politicians in Canberra, most of them, actually don't know what they're doing. And we've got this housing crisis today for a number of reasons. There's no one reason. There's a combination of reasons. Obviously, in the last few years, we've had a massive spike in immigration, which has caused a big problem. We've had a decline in the number of new houses being built on an annual basis, so that's declined as well. That's been so the immigration's obvious. They haven't, they've allowed more people in when they shouldn't have. And prior to COVID, the immigration rate was a couple of 100,000 a year. It went to 500,000 after COVID. In regards to the decline in building new buildings, I believe a big part of that's because a lot of tradies are now off building renewables instead of building new homes. And obviously, when you're bringing in 500,000 people a year and there's only 10,000 people on a visa, tradies visa, or some sort of, it's a 482 visa, that's not enough to actually build 500,000 homes. And when a lot of those people coming in on visas are actually building transmission lines or being involved in the construction of wind turbines, wind farms, or something like that, not all that 10,000 is actually going into the construction of new homes as well. And then on another level, we have the whole issue around our tax system, which rewards people who basically, if you make a capital gain on a passive investment, you'll pay half the tax you do if you make on your own income. So someone who's trying to save for a house, they're falling behind all the time because they're paying twice the rate of tax as what someone who is making a gain, on the increase in house prices. So there's that issue as well. There's a genuine concern around negative gearing. I'm of the belief that if the capital gains tax discount was removed, the incentive for negative gearing would disappear. Well, there would be still an incentive there to the extent you could make a capital gain, but the tax breaks you'd get on that capital gain wouldn't be as good as they were if you got rid of the 50% CGT. I personally have never seen the sense in negative gearing myself, because it's quite risky and you've got to actually have negative cash flow, or with the exception you can get some non-cash write-off. So, but look, given that we've had increasing house prices, it can work as a strategy, but it is high risk. But having said that, I think if we got rid of the 50% CGT discount, that would go a long way to helping solve that problem. And then the fourth issue, so we've got tax structures that need to be fixed. And then the fourth issue is monetary policy, whereby there are no caps on how much banks can borrow from offshore. And this is a part of history that people have forgotten or don't understand, and it needs to be brought back. In 1985, Paul Keating lifted capital controls that removed the requirement that for banks, or that basically allowed banks to go offshore and borrow as much money as they want. So what that did was that foreign debt in 1985 amongst private banks was $8 billion. By 2008, it was $800 billion. That sent the price of houses from 4 times earnings up to 12 times earnings. Sorry, my son's just walked in. Hop out, James. I'm doing it. Sorry. And so what that did was that meant two parents had to go back. It meant that mortgages were able to inflate. So, for example, when I worked at the Bank of Queensland, we funded our loans about 40% in domestic savings through term deposits and savings accounts, and about 60% of it was offshore finance. If that was The Bank of Queensland was only able to do that because Paul Keating lifted capital controls. Had he not lifted capital controls, all the Bank of Queensland could have lent out was what people had saved. So that $400,000, not the $1 million. And that was a virtuous cycle in the old days, because what it meant was older people, when they retired, would put their money in a savings account or a term deposit. They might earn 4%. The bank would then re-lend that money out at 5 or 6%. And effectively what it was that older Australians were effectively lending to younger Australians. But all that money the interest that younger Australians paid on their home loans went back to older Australians, which helped keep them, have a decent retirement, and it meant the money stayed in Australia. What happens now is we've inflated that bubble, and a lot of that interest goes offshore. So that's one of the reasons why we're getting more and more foreign debt, because so much of our earnings now is going offshore, whereas once upon a time it didn't. It just went to paying, interest that ended up in the pockets of pensioners. So, and of course, so yeah, there's four reasons basically: immigration, building, the lack of trades, seeing a decline in building, our taxation system, and our monetary systems, and then of course the fifth one actually. So there's probably let's call them the five now. The building regulations as well. I mean, there's building
Yeah.
regulations that we have to comply with net zero. So glass has to be a certain thickness, and there's all these other rules. I think I read the other day, every new house has to have a wheelchair access. I don't know if that's true or not, but I did read that. But it's similar things whereby, every house has to comply with just about every standard for every possible scenario. And of course, that's adding tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, not just the regulation, but building costs as well. So all of those issues need to be addressed. The immigration one can be addressed easily, in my view. The taxation one can be addressed easily. The monetary policy one can be addressed easily and quite quickly, as well as the building regulations. The reskilling of our society will take, probably a generation, whereby, we want to get back, get a higher percentage of tradies back into the workforce, and those tradies focused at looking at building houses and real factories rather than, renewables that, aren't really providing cheap and reliable energy.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, wow, I didn't know that about the money going offshore. I didn't realize
Oh,
that was such an issue.
and that's, like
Staggering.
that is a part of the economy people just don't understand, and it is
Yeah,
killing us. And not to mention the tax system as well, not just on housing, but offshore profits. The tax on offshore profits is at about half the tax on profits that are kept in Australia. So we encourage our profits to go offshore as well, not just in banking, but in so many other industries.
ouch. Um, it seems to me like this situation is getting worse and worse, faster and faster. I wonder, what do you think we're going to be looking at if I don't know if the Labor's going to win or the Liberals or what's going to happen, but if things just continue on the same path, what do you think is going to happen in the next few years to people like my family and those of us who are sort of struggling at the moment? Are we expecting to be thrown under the bus? What's going to happen to us? Do you know?
Well, look, Morgan, that's a good question and a hard one to answer. I mean, you know, uh, not going to get any easier. Let's put it this way. And we need to get our Australians back into housing. I know that they're talking about it a lot, but there's been a lot of talk about it in the last 3 years, but I'm not actually seeing a turnaround in the number of new houses being built. Immigration's come back a tad from, I think they're now looking at high threes as opposed to sort of mid fives, but still even high threes, they're going to do well to build enough houses for, say, 380,000 people. So that needs to keep coming down. It is coming down, the immigration rate. Not enough, in my view. Our party wants to bring it down to less than 100,000 people. We want a little bit of wriggle room there because industries do rely on foreign labour, unfortunately, and we need to change that, of course. But that will take. That's what I said before. It will take time to change our labour mix in our economy. But look, uh, it's until those things change, it's going to be tough for Australians not living in their houses. The hard one to tell, and there's been movements on the university sector. It's the hard one to track is the temporary visa situation, and what I've read, and I'll stand to be corrected on this, but I think there's at least over 1 million temporary visa holders in Australia, if not closer to two. That figure, if they were to slow down the rate of the temporary visa holders so that you had more of them going offshore than coming in, that would also help a lot because that would free up a lot of housing as well.
Yeah. I
Um,
thought about perhaps it might be good if those universities that are apparently raking in the cash, if perhaps they could spend some of that money on dormitories or accommodation for those foreign students too. I thought
I
that might
think
be
I
helpful.
think they do. What would be better actually if universities were taxed? That's one of our policies. Or they need to change the if they are going to still allow foreign students to come to Australia, they need to dramatically increase the cost of the visa. for if you want to get a student visa here. I'm not sure what it is. Look, I don't know what it is. I think it's in thousands. But maybe they need to look at charging a $20,000 or $30,000 fee or a significant fee, and that money is directly put into a housing fund that will build social housing for Australians.
Yeah, that sounds great. That sounds like a great
Yeah.
idea. I heard Albanese saying something along the lines of "no one left behind." What do you think about him, and do you think the Liberals are any better?
Oh, look, Anthony Albanese is basically a career politician. He doesn't really have the knowledge of the Tax Act, the monetary system that, we spoke about before. He wouldn't even have the nous to look at the breakup of the immigration intake to see how many are on 482 visas. So I don't like I said before, the problem with these politicians is they probably mean well, but a lot of them, well, nearly all of them, I can tell you for a fact, don't have the know-how to actually fix the country. Apart from, like, it's easy, you can say lower immigration. That's probably something. But yet again, even then, you've got to get the Immigration, Home Affairs, and Treasury in the same room, and there needs to be regular updates. You need to have regular meetings with those three departments and find out why they're not coordinating what's going on. So basically, the Immigration Department should not be issuing new visas. They need to be tracking the new visas, and then they need to be talking to Home Affairs to see how many people are actually using those visas and coming in through the borders. And then they need to be speaking with Treasury and saying, well, how many new houses are being built? So Treasury needs to go to immigration and say, we've only built 30,000 houses this year, or whatever number of houses they built this year. So let's say it's 130,000, assume 2 people or 2.5 people per house. That might be, say, 300,000, but then you've already got, say, 500,000, 1,000,000 Australians. So they need to be like sitting down the whole three departments and putting their heads together as to actually ensuring that they're increasing the supply of available housing for, here's the key word here, Australians. And that's what they need to be doing. So if Albanese knew what he was doing, he'd be having weekly updates, and he'd be getting the meter in there, showing Australians, here we are. We're getting these three departments who take, who are responsible for this. And these are the figures we've come up with. We're not going to have more than, say, 100,000 people. We're going to build 350, so let's get back up to, say, 200,000 new houses a year that could house 500 million people. And we expect to have, so say 500,000 people, less 100,000 new immigrants. That frees up housing for 400,000 Australians. And we expect in, say, 2 years or 3 years that 1.2 million Australians will be back into a house, something along those lines. And that's the sort of stuff that Albanese needs to be doing. And that's, I come from a finance background where we do this sort of stuff all the time, where you've got to, budget for things, you do up a project, you've got to estimate. But, unfortunately, our bureaucracies don't talk to each other, and that's the sort of thing where things have to change.
Yeah, and is that the same in the Liberal Party, and I guess some
Yep.
of the other parties
Yep,
as
they
well?
won't.
More.
Look, Peter Dutton, to be fair to Peter, has been in Home Affairs and Immigration. Whether or not he had the nous to pull all three together and make them, sort of reconcile the numbers so that you ended up with more Australians, as I explained before, getting into available houses. He's probably a little bit more switched on. But yet again, the Liberals have been pretty weak on immigration. Immigration was out of control under their 9 years in government. Started
Yeah.
to explode. And yet again, that's just the immigration side of it. You've then got to actually have the guts to get rid of all these ridiculous regulations. They should know what to do with the Tax Act, because I basically told them what to do for the last 5 years and was ignored how to reform the tax system. And I'm not trying to blow smoke up my backside here, but, I do have a Master's of Tax Law and a Master's in Applied Finance. So, they had a subject matter expert there that they completely ignored. And then no one understands monetary system whatsoever, and there needs to be capital controls reintroduced. You'd probably, in theory, you should have a better chance of Labor agreeing to that, but ironically enough, it was Labor that, under Keating, that relaxed capital controls. So, yet again, neither of them would have the confidence in their own knowledge or intelligence to push back on the RBA, who would be saying, oh, no, we've got to keep open borders, because the RBA is basically a puppet of the International Bank of Settlements. Why do I say that? Because I know that because Michelle Bullock effectively wouldn't give me the minutes of their meetings between the RBA and the International Bank of Settlements, because she said they wouldn't have a seat at the table. The RBA wouldn't get a seat at the table of international bankers if they did give us the minutes, or give myself the minutes. So in other words, she said, I'm more subservient to international bankers, unelected and unaccountable, and foreign international bankers than I am to an elected senator or representative of the people. So, that monetary policy one is really, really important, and as that's got to change as well. But basically, people first would be the only party that has the brains to, and the know how to fix that one.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, wow. We're in a really bad spot then. We're in a really bad spot, I mean, as a country. Um, yeah,
Look,
that's
look, we've still got a lot of opportunity. I try to tell people don't lose faith and don't lose hope. Um, but all we need are politicians who have the intelligence and the know-how and the courage to do the right thing. The solutions are there if they've got the guts to do it, and understand what has to be done. Unfortunately, most politicians have neither the courage nor the know-how how to actually implement these solutions, and that's what we're trying to do. Sorry if I'm sounding a bit of a sales pitch here, but there is an election a week away. Um, but that's what we know how to do it. People first.
Yeah, well, that's good. And I guess that leads on to my next question. I'm here taking a pretty desperate, pitched a tent in front of Albo's mansion.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to be getting their attention. Millions of people have seen what I'm doing, but the government doesn't seem to be paying much attention. So, do you have any ideas what we could do? There's millions of us suffering, and it's going to only get worse. What do we do?
Well,
What can
I
you
mean, if I
suggest?
get back in, what we'll do is we can organise a press conference in Canberra when Parliament's sitting, whereby we get the press gallery. We call the press conference with the press gallery from Canberra. We'll do a live stream on our own social media so that if the bastards decide not to turn up, we'll record the fact that we called the press conference and then they didn't turn up. Because this homelessness is a real issue and it needs to be addressed in the next term of government, regardless of who's in charge.
Yes, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I'm not here on behalf of any political party or anything like that. I just want us to be heard, and I'll talk to anyone that'll listen.
It's got to
But
be
that
more than
sounds
just
great.
heard. I mean,
Yeah,
politicians are very good at listening. They're not very good at solving things. Politicians seem to think they're
yeah,
good. Politicians seem to want to judge themselves by the fact that they go around the country listening to people. And yeah, you've got to listen to people. I accept that. But you've got to do more than just listen. You've got to solve the bloody problem. And
that's
this is
right.
the problem. They're all very good at listening, but it ain't solving the problem. So,
Yeah,
yeah, that's what needs to be done. We need solutions, and to implement solutions, you've got to have the know-how, and to have the know-how, you had to have come from the real world where you understand how these structures have been put in place, and have so. I mean, like I'm old enough, just old enough to remember what Keating did in the '80s, Keating and Hawke, and that stuff laid the groundwork, along with Howard bringing in the 50% CGT discount. Um, that didn't help either. But yeah. So both parties do have some blame here. Oh yeah, and the first home buyers grant, it wasn't the first home buyers grant. It was the last person. It was the sellers grant because basically all that did was push house prices up by $7,000. Um, if
yeah,
not more actually, because really, if you needed $50,000 for a deposit, say 5% deposit for a home loan, and you only had say you only had $43,000, then you times that by 20, it's $860,000. If you were given another $7,000, it meant you could buy a house for $1 million. So it actually stuck house prices up by another $140,000. Really, if you assume work on a 5% deposit, that might be not an exaggeration, but right at the end of the extreme. But even if you had a 50% deposit, it still meant you could stick by, pay an extra $14,000 for a house. So that just inflated house prices as well. That
yeah.
first
Wow,
home buyer grant, it was a subsidy that didn't need to happen. It's a false economy, that one.
wow. That's staggering. There's so many issues I didn't even realize that are affecting this, and I really hope that we can get something done about it. Thank you so much for your time, and on behalf of the 3.5 million of us also that just feel like we aren't heard, thanks for taking the time to have a chat. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Morgan, and good luck with it. And if I do get back in, yeah, let's keep in touch and try and solve this problem.
That'd be fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers. All right, you
Okay.
got that, Chris? Chris? Chris, you there?
That's right. I'll just leave the phone on.
Yep. No worries. I'll just sit
Yeah,
here and
okay.
wait for
Thanks,
them to
Morgan.
come
We'll
back.
keep in touch.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Have a great night.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you. We'll send it over to you before it's, yeah. Well, thanks.
Yeah, okay, I'm still here. Yeah, you'll send it over. Yeah, no, that's cool. Yeah, I'm happy with that. I don't think I'll send anything that was going to embarrass me or so you're happy to post that, go for it.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
but
Thank
when you
you.
do, let me know and I'll share it. Have you got a Facebook page or something?
I have an X. I was deleted on Facebook as soon as
Oh,
I
I'll
made the
share it on
DNA
X.
question.
Yeah,
So yeah,
yeah,
X is still allowing me to post, so that's good.
good.
Thanks
Okay,
so much.
righto, Morgan. Take care.
Appreciate it.
Cheers, mate.
Thanks.